Hi, I'm Sarah.
And I am Rena, and welcome to
Biopic, a podcast story. This is a podcast where we dissect the good, bad, ugly, and absurd of this specific genre of motion picture, the biopic. If you want to learn more about us, our scoring system, and how we choose movies, please check out our special introductory episode. Introduction. Who are we and what are we doing?
Sarah. What movie are we doing this week?
This week we will be talking about Gotti. Rena, can you give us the trigger warning?
This movie contains depictions of violence, foul language, child death, poorly imitated outer borough New York accents, and mob hits. Sarah, can you think of anything I may have left out?
Nothing specific, however. I am in a rage over this, so Rena, can you give us a spoiler warning?
Spoiler warning. We are going to spoil everything, including possibly the major plot points in works of narrative art having nothing to do with this particular movie, Gotti, including that they deserve the title Works of Narrative Art, and Gotti does not. Consider yourself warned.
Some of the sources we used in this episode include Fear City and Get Gotti, two documentary series on Netflix, and also a bunch of internet resources, including a concise and thorough story from Bustle about the accuracy of this film.
I have zero interest whatsoever in true crime or the modern mob, so I Googled inaccuracies in Gotti because I do not care about this movie. I also looked at the Bustle article, but the words moved through my brain and out, and I retained nothing. Sarah, can you please tell us a little bit about John Gotti and the 2018 movie Gotti?
From our friends at Wikipedia, John Joseph Gotti Jr., born October 27, 1940, died June 10, 2002, was an American mafioso and boss of the Gambino crime family in New York City. He ordered and helped to orchestrate the murder of Gambino boss Paul Castellano in December of 1985, and he took over the family shortly thereafter, leading to what was described as America's most powerful crime syndicate. And some information on the movie, also from our friends at Wikipedia. Gotti is a 2018 American biographical crime film. Those words, biographical crime and film, are doing some real heavy lifting here. About New York City mobster John Gotti, directed by Entourage's Kevin Connolly and written by Len Dobbs and Leo Rossi. Film stars John Travolta as Gotti alongside his real-life wife Kelly Preston as Gotti's wife Victoria in her penultimate film. The film was announced in 2010, but it languished in development for several years with numerous directors and actors attached, including Barry Levinson and Al Pacino. Principal photography finally began in June 2016 in Cincinnati, Ohio, and concluded in Brooklyn, New York in February 2017. The film was originally set to be released in the United States on December 15, 2017, but Lionsgate, the slated distributor, sold the film back to its producers and studio, delaying the release. After premiering at the 2018 Cannes Film Festival, Gotti underperformed both critically and commercially. It grossed just $6 million against a $10 million production budget and was universally lambasted by critics who lamented the writing, aesthetics, and performances.
Sarah, I read that this movie had at least 38 different producers. Can you explain to other non-film majors why having 38 producers is bad?
I'd be happy to explain this. Couple of things about having 38 of anything in charge of anything. There are also 5 production companies of varying degrees of legitimacy, whose names pop up at the front end of this with production company logos. So those 38 producers, some of them might just give some money and say, I want to see getting my money back. Some people might be putting their money into this as a way to cleanse that money and make it legitimate. So you've got everyone from that all the way up to people who are going to be in the kitchen making demands about the look and feel and aesthetics of a film. That's a lot of people sitting at a table asking for things. Gotti's children and grandchildren were also aligned with this project, which I think also explains some of the tonal issues that I will be talking about. The film is based on a memoir written by Gotti's son, who appears in this film as a character. Having 38 people of varying degrees of engagement having a say in anything because their money is involved in it is a terrible idea. You're just going to end up serving a lot of different masters. There is a part of me that does have some sympathy for Kevin Connolly as a director. This is too many people to have to be responsive to. And that's the sympathy I am going to allow for Kevin Connolly. Otherwise, everyone involved in this is an adult. They are able to make decisions. No one was desperate. Everyone chose their path in this film, and I am not going to feel sorry for them beyond acknowledging that having 38 different people in your ear at any given time has to be really challenging if you're trying to make anything resembling art, which ultimately this film is not.
Yes. We also wanted to say something about the atrocious needle drops in this film, that every time they throw in a song, it's gratuitously overprojecting the character in a way that, in trying to make them seem badass, is more of an eye roller. Music doesn't need to relate to the character lyrically, and this was all way over the line.
I don't know if I've ever seen a credit as sinister as music composed by Pitbull, which is a credit that you see on this movie before they start going into the 38 different producers. And as soon as you see that, you should know, like, buckle up. This is gonna be difficult for all of us. Pitbull should be working at Morgan Stanley, as far as I'm concerned. He should not be allowed to be in the world and the realm of creating music. And that's a strong feeling that I have. He has done what he needed to do musically, and he needs to back off and go get a job on Wall Street or somewhere else where he's not allowed to be creative anymore, because he has tapped that well. It is dry, and we don't need it anymore. And we certainly didn't need it in this movie. There is rap overlaying, like, da 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 da. Anytime a movie wants to lazily convey its character's badassery, they're like, let's get a rapper in here to rap over some sort of random sample of music. And that's where we start. We start there. We start with them being like, by the way, John Gotti is a badass. Listen to this rap over Pizzeria Uno music. Jesus Christ. I've got Pitbull music. I've got 38 producers. I have the presence of Randall Emmett, the darkest soul in the film industry, both legitimate and illegitimate. And I have John Travolta looking at me and talking to me, and I am freaked out.
You described Gotti as barely a movie and held together by mediocrity and hope. And your description of it as barely a movie reminded me of a critique that a friend of mine gave on the film Roller Gator. He said, "This does not deserve to be called a movie. This is best described as data that has been captured and recorded on film for subsequent viewing."
I have a question here. What is Roller Gator about?
Roller Gator tells the story of a talking purple baby alligator that is played by a very fake-looking puppet. You never see the roller gator roller skate. It's in the backpack of a blonde girl on roller skates. There are some points where ninjas show up to try to take the roller gator. It makes jokes and does bad imitations of things that are not funny, just in terms of, wow, this was recorded on film. And the plot is that the bad guy wants to capture the talking purple baby alligator and use it in a sideshow. There's some guy who lives in a swamp who pops up at some point, and this bad guy is played by a third-rate Sheen Estevez clan cousin who looks kind of like if you made a wax sculpture blending all the Sheen Estevezes together for Madame Tussauds and then put it in a room at like 300 degrees or whatever temperature Madame Tussauds statues start to melt a little bit at, it would look like this guy.
I've heard enough. This is a better movie.
Wait, Gotti or Roller Gator?
Roller Gator. It sounds like it has a more cohesive narrative structure, clearer villains, and possibly more of a thesis to it. It sounds like it has auteur energy in a way that Gotti just doesn't. Gotti borrows drunkenly from better movies about the mafia in the way that that guy freshman year had a poster of Taxi Driver in his room and completely missed the point of it. Gotti not only borrows everything that it is from better movies about very different situations and tries to cram John Gotti into those roles at various times, but also managed to entirely miss the point of any of those stories. This movie is a fiasco and a fuck up on a level that like goes so many layers deep that I don't know if there is time.
It's quite fortunate that the total runtime amounts to about 100 minutes, which makes it the shortest of the biopics we've watched so far, which is not even a saving grace. It's triage. There's also a bunch of family movies of the Gottis, and it's like they've used whatever they could to pad out the bare 90 minutes of screenplay that you're told you have to get written in your first draft in film school.
It's amazing how lazy the final product of this seems, because it's not like they didn't have 6 years to figure this shit out and make a decent screenplay.
Why are there at least 4 framing devices in this?
Because the American way is to have more than one of anything in order to make it good. Why would you have one framing device if you can make it like a Russian doll where you keep taking off layers, but instead of at the center of it is this cute little doll is like a turd shaped like a clown?
It opens with the first framing device I'll cite of John Travolta as John Gotti talking to the camera. We see the number 7 train going into Manhattan at dusk with Italian music playing in the background. And he says, "Let me tell you something. New York is the greatest fucking city in the world, and it feels fake. He hasn't taken me into his confidence. I don't care." And I noticed that John Travolta has this way of holding his jaw up with his lower lip out in this movie, like a person who doesn't have teeth, and the way that their face will look like it's shrunk in on itself. But when I looked at pictures of John Gotti, my perception was this is not how he held his jaw.
Travolta does this thing, and you see him use it in a more efficient way as an actor in American Crime Story, The People versus O.J. Simpson. But when he wants to look like an angry badass, he sort of does this cat's asshole pucker of his face, where he's like, mm-hmm. And that's what he does throughout this whole movie. It's supposed to look like a scowl, but it looks like a cat's butthole.
What I'm thinking of here is Tony Manero forgot to put his dentures in.
It's unfortunate to have him standing there and you're like, remember when he made a better movie once? Anytime Travolta's in something, I feel like he's either in a good thing every like 5 to 10 years, or he's in something that reminds you of the time that he was in a good movie and it makes you sad. And this is one of those times where you're like, remember when you were in something good? That's too bad. Now I'm watching this. One of the things that they out of the gates fail with is John Gotti was a really, really, really bad person. And there's this thing about John Gotti that's kind of interesting that they never get to, is that John Gotti was really one of like the most notable gangsters to have who he was informed by the entertainment that made the mafia iconic in the first place. So it's almost like you're watching him and you're like, he's playing what he thinks a badass gangster is. It's not necessarily all inborn to him. There's like a studied self-consciousness about the way John Gotti was. Immediately, though, it's a real turnoff, and you're like, I don't care about this person. This movie's gonna try and make me think he's a good person when he wasn't. He was a terrible person. He was an unrepentant killer. You see that throughout the history of the mafia. Killing wasn't always like a joyful thing. It was a necessity. It was because there were beefs. This movie makes a lot of comments about how there's all these rules that they need to follow. And you see how John Gotti unironically breaks all of these rules all the time. And it's such a violation of what the mafia is supposed to be. He's a bad dude and he sucks. And this movie is trying to tell me, no, you're wrong about that. He's a misunderstood family man.
And speaking to the manner of speech here, I guess I heard a recording of John Gotti where he has that outer borough tough guy accent, but I'm just hearing generalizations of that here. The second of the numerous framing devices is the framing device of John Gotti post-head, neck, and throat cancer. I don't know if that's the proper name for it, but it's the cancer that makes you the ugliest. Meeting with his son in prison to talk about his son's possible plea bargain. And there's the third framing device of footage of greasy, tacky people talking about how great John Gotti was and how awesome he was for the neighborhood. And everyone in it looks like a total schlub, unintentionally showing like how within portrayals of the mafia, how far everything has fallen from the glamour of the Godfather films. And then there's also the aforementioned footage of the Gottis taking up the opening credits. This footage also serves to remind me of how much nobody looks much like who they're supposed to be, and does not capture anything that made this fascinating to the public at the time.
The look of this film is so hideous. First of all, it's all shot in the dark. Scenes are so poorly lit. We find ourselves in Massapequa, Long Island in 1973.
And when we opened in 1973, I couldn't tell if it was layers and layers of makeup or tech de-aging, although I suspect they did not have the budget for tech de-aging. At any rate, regardless of the character's age.
We see him taking on his first hit. One thing I will say for this film is that this movie is very accurate in the beats that it hits. These things all happen. We see the first tonal struggle. He's like, I gotta go do this. I'm a bastard and it's dope and it's fun and it's like Entourage, except we murder people. We see this hit, and this is more or less the way this happened based on witness statements, where he went into a bar with two guys to kill a man who he had been kidnapping and ransoming Italian mafia members. The killing was kind of a mess, and this is how John Gotti made his bones and went to prison for the first time.
I'm trying to understand here. He carries out the initial hit on the Irish guy in the bar. Why does he only serve 3 years?
I'm so glad you asked. He had an attorney named Roy Kahn, who's one of history's greatest monsters, who's been on the wrong side of the bench with every terrible human being you can think of, from Joseph McCarthy to our former president. And he was able to negotiate a plea deal for, I believe it was like aggravated manslaughter or attempted manslaughter, something ridiculous, possibly even a, defense of, he was under duress, but he was able to get 3 years.
Well, that is a testament to the skills of Roy Kahn.
He's a bad dude.
Oh, yes.
Then we cut to the future after he has conducted this hit, where he is, like Hannibal Lecter, meeting with this nothing of an actor who plays his son. Oh my God. With his very bad kind of cancer. I just want to say, I know how hard I was on Robert Wuhl, and I stand by that. So when I say that this actor, a young man named Spencer LaFracco, makes Robert Wuhl look like Daniel Day-Lewis, I hope you can appreciate how not meant for this role this actor is. And I have my suspicions as to why this young man was cast in the film, and it involves a couch and the alleged proclivities a certain Mr. Travolta and his love of massage. Certainly he is a charisma vacuum in this film, and he also has a Richard Spencer haircut throughout the movie. This movie is also ugly to look at because it's like being at a bad Ren fair where you see some people are fully invested in being dressed up like they're at the Ren fair, and they're talking like they're at the Ren fair, and they're like, "Yee, would you like a turkey leg?" And I'm going to go joust someone and cut their head off. And then someone else just has the hat on, and that's dumb. Like, you have that kind of energy in this film where you have people who are fully committed to the look and to the bit. And then you have people who are like, listen, this is my haircut and this is how it stays. And Mr. LaFracco is on that end of it where they're kind of like, this haircut looks cool. It is not period appropriate at any point in this film. It definitely further detracts from his performance, such as it is. And at this point, John has cancer. This screenplay does feel like it was written by a bot or possibly by a room full of orangutans with a computer. Every scene is just like blah, 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 Mamma Mia, and blah, 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 blah. What are you talking about? None of the dialogue is meaningful in any way. Is blah, 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 mafia, blah. So his son is in jail too and is talking about taking a plea deal for something. You're just hearing this back and forth and none of it matters.
We cut to a scene from that first 3-year prison sentence of the Gotti children visiting him in prison. And I wrote this down as the what's the matter with you scene, where they keep repeating this phase, and he and Victoria Gotti are having some kind of back and forth. It is Kelly Preston in her second to last film in a dark wig, and this seems like a parody on a scene of a mob couple doing something that is combined combativeness and possibly unsexy foreplay, but it just looks like a parody on bad acting in bad mafia movies, but they're doing it for real. He's annoyed that his son wants to go as a cop for Halloween.
No child of mine is gonna be a cop. Yeah, that's the dialogue. It's just the back and forth. What's the matter with you? I know John Travolta is Italian, but Kelly Preston is not, and her performance is quite broad in this film. I don't know whether his son dressed up as a cop. I don't really care. Was that the son who, spoiler alert, is about to bite it?
No, the oldest son was the one who was going to go as a cop. So he gets out of prison. He's driving around and they're in a new house. He needs to figure out where the house is. We meet his middle son, Little Frank. We know that this kid is going to die without having read the facts of the Gotti story, because he is a straight A student, which means that he's too good and has to die. Thank you for the foreshadowing.
Yeah, they lay it on pretty thick. He goes back to jail again, and we see a scene where he gets a leave to go to a dentist appointment and then sneaks out the back door of the dentist office, and they start playing the theme from Shaft, which I was like, how dare you? How dare you remind me of a better movie? How dare you remind me of music that doesn't belong to Pitbull in this film? Travolta carries out a hit and then returns to jail, and it's purposeless except to show us what a badass John Gotti is. And also, there's a point here that I just want to add. There's a lot of talk about the dentist in this movie, and I'm pretty sure someone spent some pretty serious time writing trolley trivia on IMDb, one of which is that this movie was sponsored by the American Dental Association. As you know, I spent a lot of time going down the rabbit hole of production company credits and producers, and I didn't find anything that gave evidence to this, but it's worth flagging that they talk about the dentist a lot more in this movie than I've heard in any movie, with the exception of maybe Little Shop of Horrors. Meanwhile, Johnny Jr. is at a military academy and he's getting into fights. We also, at this point, meet Angela Ruggiero, who is played by character actor Pruitt Taylor Vince, who is better than this movie. and also Neil Della Croce, who is the underboss under Paul Castellano, who is played by Stacy Keach, also a better actor than this movie. Somehow John has gotten out of prison. We're doing another thing that they borrow from better movies, where they go out to a club. This movie just like keeps stealing everything that isn't nailed down from better movies and trying to make those things fit. And this is another instance of that, where we're at a club, we're seeing people's names, there's music playing. It's like the scene in Goodfellas. It's like the scene in A Bronx Tale, where they're introducing people. But like, for what end? Why is any of this happening? This movie shouldn't exist. Anyway, John III is getting advice from his dad. And I actually pulled out a list of all of like the ChatGPT like standard issue mafia movie advice, and it's all in here like that, like keep your friends close but your enemies closer, never take sides against the family, pay your debts, never go against your gut, blah blah blah. None of it's insightful about John Gotti or about the world that he is in. It's all just like, look, blah blah, look, here's the mafia.
Yeah. So little Frank dies.
He gets hit by a car. This is very sad, and this is a very real thing that happened. And I note at this point, too, the cars in this movie, most of them look really great. And apparently a lot of them are Travolta's cars, which makes me like, does he just have a backlot filled with like vintage sedans from 1975? Maybe he does. I don't know. I don't know what he does with his money besides give it to Xenu and not spend it on medical care. And this neighbor of John Gotti's, John Favaro, they frame it up in this movie as if John Favaro is proudly walking around the neighborhood like, I killed John Gotti's kid, which is really unfair. It was ruled an accident by the police. Favaro attempted to apologize. He clearly regretted this incident, as anyone who is not a stone-cold psychopath would if they hit and killed a child. And this movie presents this as if the Gottis have been deeply wronged by this rando man in their neighborhood and have no choice but to kill him because the son is dead.
They keep trying to canonize people who don't deserve it. Victoria has a bunch of despair scenes.
There's a very long bit of narrative nonsense where we see a news report that basically walks through what happened to John Favaro, which is one day he was grabbed, put in a van, and disappeared. And he was declared dead in absentia because I believe his body was never found. This is just a guy who was in the wrong place at the wrong time. This is presented as a heroic move, and Victoria seems to recover after someone murders a man in her son's name, which cool storytelling. We also see the seeds planted about the issues that Gotti has with Paul Castellano, the head of the family, and that he doesn't like the way Paul does things. Junior's life is developing, and I couldn't care less, but he maybe kills a kid in a fight. And Pruitt Taylor Vince shows up and is like, your dad's going to have to take a ton of heat for you. And I was like, oh, look, the hero is back again, taking the heat for his son murdering someone. And we also find out that Angelo has been recorded a ton, which this was a thing that was actually happening at the time period. The SDNY, the Southern District of New York, was building out a massive case, leveraging racketeering, leveraging RICO to try and take down all of the families. They were planting bugs in all sorts of places. You can see a lot more about that in the documentary Fear City. So Angelo is in a lot of trouble for that. We find out that Della Croce is dying. We're driving towards this place where Gotti is acting as if he had no choice but to start considering, like, I have to take over this family and I have to murder this man.
I had a hard time remembering who anyone was or telling them apart. We're told in offhand dialogue and captions, but nobody's distinctive enough for me to remember. And also, you certainly can't discern passage of time from looking at the kid playing John the Son because he looks 16 the entire time. There's something with the case around Willie Boy, who I've forgotten who that is.
What happened here was this was one of the first cases that they tried to make stick with John Gotti. And it's just another one of those like mishmash of tax evasion, murder, blah, blah, blah. We find out that Willie Boy, someone in his crew, has also been a confidential informant. This is all true. Diane Giacalone, the attorney on this, was either forced to or chose to out him as a confidential informant. It's unfortunate because that basically like was a death warrant for this man. The long and short of it is that Gotti didn't heroically beat a rap in this case at all. That's the way it's presented in this movie, as if he, through a combination of smart lawyering and assailing the character of other witnesses and stuff, like that he was able to start the trend of the Teflon Don. He paid off a jury member. This is in the newspaper. It's a thing that got found out about and written about in like 1991, framing it up like there was some sort of like great lawyering going on. But really all they did was intimidate witnesses and pay off the jury.
We see the fireworks over Little Italy that John Gotti was beloved for. These fireworks are unimpressive. The story that I grew up with was that John Gotti was trying to compete with the Macy's fireworks display, but I've seen the Macy's 4th of July fireworks display, and this is nothing. This is like backyard sparklers. And Junior meets some girl who is 16, and he doesn't recognize her, but this is his future wife, Kelly. Again, don't care, and these fireworks do not live up to their reputation.
I hate it so much in mafia storytelling when they're like, but look what he did for the neighborhood. Gangsters are always making grand gestures for the neighborhood, buying people turkeys, whatever. I hate that that is used as a way to like say like, look, he's kind of a good guy though, because he got us some fireworks. And it's like, yeah, he also put your uncle in the fucking trunk of a car. Sorry. Gotti remains pissed about Paul Castellano. And Paul is maybe going to kill Angelo, maybe. We don't know. What we do know is that Paul Castellano was going to probably break up John Gotti's crew. And we start to see the plans taking shape where Gotti's like, I'm going to do this. And there's a bunch of come at the king, you best not miss, blah, blah, blah dialogue about this. And we see Gotti bringing everyone together. And again, it's like, it's presented to us like Gotti didn't have a choice. This was the honorable choice. We see the murder take place, and this is done very faithfully to what happened in terms of Paul Castellano being at Sparks Steakhouse in Manhattan and him being shot outside the restaurant in his car with his driver and, Russian hats and blah, blah, blah. Like all of this is done the way it was done. And we see all the guys gathered up in some basement enjoying the murder that they just did. And they all vote to make John Gotti the new boss. And he's a star now. He's becoming a big deal. Andy Warhol once painted him for the cover of Time magazine. So we're seeing all of these covers and sort of like him become this sort of celebrated star of the mafia and how he basks in the spotlight. This movie does nothing to talk about why Gotti was that way.
I can't see from this what made him so charismatic to people. And I would venture that the mafia guys who ran a family for a long time in the old days didn't relish a high profile. It's kind of dumb of him to want that. And then Angelo is very sad about getting kicked out of the family.
So Angelo Ruggiero is pissed off because someone blows up somebody's car and some people die. He sets up an unsanctioned hit on Anthony Casso, whose nickname was Gas Pipe. And they had beef between them for a long time. But he sets up this hit. He brings in guys to do it who don't do a very good job. Casso does not die. This super fucked up thing happens where Casso brings in these police officers who were on the take, Stephen Caracappa and Louis Eppolito. They were able to bring the shooter to Casso, and he tortured him and killed him as a warning to Ruggiero, who then they decide they're going to throw him out of the family and basically like ice him out. They kind of put you in Siberia and You don't get to be a part of decision making anymore. You don't get to go to the meetings. You don't get to be a part of the club, and you get isolated, and then he dies.
So sad. And then we're at the wedding, and it appeared that this dress that Kelly was wearing looked like it was copied from the videos that we saw in the opener, but this was just every idea of the tacky mob bride I've ever seen, because aside from the huge hair, it was like floofy and frilly, and she has one of those veils where the thing comes down to a V point. It's every confectionery, tacky 80s frou-frou thing about the wedding gown. And I want Vera Wang to come save us.
I also felt like the movie didn't go far enough with the fashion. There's this hideous wedding dress in the center of it all, but because they don't have the budget, this wasn't as hideous as it should have been. The 80s are a vibe, and being a leader of a mafia family in the 80s is a vibe. This movie, with a budget, with a POV, with something that seemed like a shooting script. We talked about Cleopatra never had a shooting script. This feels like it's possibly improv'd to the degree that it doesn't feel like there's any words that were written down on paper. Like everyone shouted mafia movie scenes back and forth to each other. If they were able to turn this up to 10, in terms of like the fashion, showing us bridesmaid dresses, showing us guests, showing us all of that. I'm going to mention Goodfellas again. That has a pretty great wedding scene in it.
Yes, I also felt like this wedding scene at what appears to be the Plaza Hotel was attempting to reference that opener to Godfather, which it is not at all.
I know I like to talk about the dog Air Bud, but if Air Bud did a movie about the mafia, this would be the wedding in Air Bud Meets the Mob. Speaking of Air Bud, would he have been a better actor than the son?
Yeah, I've never seen Air Bud, but I assume this golden retriever a decent actor compared to Spencer What's-His-Face and Robert Wuhl. So Gotti is famous, yada yada, and Sammy turns on him, and there has been this whole thing about Victoria doesn't want John Jr. or John III or whoever he is to be in the mob, but he gets made anyway. It's like Gotti Sr. starts off saying, "Oh, I'm so proud of you, you're going to this military school," then gets mad at him for the bar fight, and then totally shifts and he's proud of his son being made. Again, disconnect, and again, don't care.
This switch is never explained. And Sammy the Bull Gravano turning on him is also never really illustrated that well. There's a good reason why Sammy the Bull Gravano turned on him and why these men started turning on the concept of omerta and everything. And there were tapes of Gotti talking about how he was going to blame a bunch of things on Sammy the Bull, who became his underboss. And he also complained about how greedy Sammy the Bull Gravano was. And Gravano essentially seems like he maybe felt like it was him or Gotti, and he had to make the choice, but it's shrugged off in this way where it's like, well, he was never really blah, 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 blah. You were going to throw him under the bus. And he was like, screw this code. I don't want to do that when you're just as guilty as I am. And you mentioned earlier about earlier mob bosses trying to keep a lower profile. One who's mentioned in here a few times, but never really gets a whole lot of attention is Vincent the Chin Gigante, who actually tried to have John Gotti assassinated at one point in the late 80s. Vincent Gigante pretended to be senile for 30 years. He walked around in his bathrobe in order to put people off the scent of the level of power that he had, and in order to make it seem like he wasn't involved in the mafia. That's one example of the protection that these men put around themselves in order to keep themselves from getting in trouble. Taking a moment to contrast that with how John Gotti courted attention and wanted to be a star and dressed the part and was influenced by this industry, like that's interesting. Why not do that?
A note here, at least Tony Soprano knew that his son was an idiot.
He did.
Okay, so supporters are angry.
So Sammy turned on him, and John Gotti finally gets busted and officially tried and punished and is sent to jail. And everyone's all upset about it. They're out in the streets, and we're reminded of how stupid people are. And then we have a half-assed montage of people just getting killed. And we roll into the end of this movie. The last 20 minutes of it or so is pretty much just wall-to-wall montages. So we're seeing people get killed. We're seeing Junior get busted and telling his family, I'm going away for a while. They're playing Duran Duran's Come Undone, which, okay. John Jr. is telling his lawyer about Rico, which offended me to my core. As if any lawyer doesn't know what Rico is in the 90s when they have a mafia prince as their client. But John Jr. is going to jail too. And then, I don't know where you were last Saturday. It's 7:09. If you heard a loud yell and the earth shake, it's because they started playing House of the Rising Sun when John Gotti died.
Oh, I saw that and I was like, give me a break. Can we give this movie credit for at least not playing Leonard Cohen's Hallelujah?
I guess. There are certain songs that have been taken by previous movies where once they've used them, they cannot be used again. I have examples for you. Bohemian Rhapsody in Wayne's World. Don't even bother trying to put Bohemian Rhapsody in your movie. It's been done. It's been taken. There is iconic imagery associated with that. Scorsese has used Give Me Shelter more than once in his films, but he owns that piece of music and its use in film, you know? Like, that's it. Layla and Goodfellas. There's another example. So John Gotti's dead and House of the Rising Sun is playing. It's such a lazy needle drop, first of all, because this song is featured heavily in a reckoning sequence in Casino at the end of that movie. And so to just take this song and put it at the end of your movie, Kevin Connolly, how dare you? I know what you did. I see what you did, and it was lazy. And then the movie starts bending over backwards yet again to show us about what a great guy John Gotti was, according to the people in his neighborhood or whatever.
Oh, yes. And they show how painful it is to die of ugly cancer. They act like he's so noble with this thing where the nurse is asking him, why don't you just let go? And he was like, because every day I stay alive is a fuck you to the government. And they acted like it's this noble thing that he's choosing to be alive and awake. There's so much pain. And I suppose this is admirable, but there are good people in the world who fight cancer too.
Also, I'm quite sure the government didn't give a shit whether he lived or died at that point. He was in prison. I just was yelling, how dare you, over and over while I was watching these people talk about what a great guy John Gotti was. And I'm glad he gave you fireworks. It doesn't make it okay that he murdered all those people. And at this point, like 10 minutes left in the movie, we start seeing how his son is, I didn't realize this, but his son is actually Reuben Hurricane Carter. And has been unjustly imprisoned. And Kelly Preston is screaming, the government tried to take my son because he keeps having to stand trial for things that he did. Like an ordinary so-and-so. It's like the Conqueror in this way where they're treating it as if he is a martyr for something. I don't know what exactly. Like, he's suffering because his father was John Gotti, who was actually a super awesome dude. Like, is that what we're saying?
No idea. But yes, they do act like his son is unfairly persecuted and like it was this waste of resources that other people got off for innocent John Gotti the younger, when he was shown becoming a made man with a great deal of pride, and we all know what that entailed.
We saw him beat a man to death, right? That's a thing that happened in this movie, right?
They act as if him becoming a made man with a crew entailed scooping ice cream and making unicorn balloons. And isn't it terrible? We put all these resources into persecuting this wonderful family man. And no, and they have this footage of all of these people sentimentalizing Gotti and saying all these dumb things about how great he was for the neighborhood and blah, blah, blah. These people saying how great John Gotti was are stupid. And it's just movie saint making for people who don't deserve it. And everyone looks oily and greasy and poorly dressed and cheap and tacky.
It's embarrassing to be like, well, this guy gave us fireworks, so he shouldn't be in prison.
Right. And then we see at some point in this ending wrap-up that return to the bridge framing device that appeared at the beginning. And is that it? Are we done?
I mean, we're done except for the game I prepared for you.
Oh, yes, we have a game. Hooray.
So, as I mentioned at the top, this movie has connection to Entourage. One of the production credits on this film belongs to one Randall Emmett. You don't watch the Bravo universe, do you?
Do not watch the Bravo universe. The only reality TV that I have sat through all of was PBS's Frontier House. I never watched Entourage. I am going to flunk this quiz, I think.
You probably are, but not necessarily for reasons that you think. Randall Emmett is the basis for the character Turtle on Entourage. He got his start as Mark Wahlberg's assistant and became a producer, and he has produced approximately 11 billion films. He is also a noted exploiter, allegedly, of Bruce Willis in his very sad decline. He worked Bruce Willis to the bone over the past few years on his films, part of the multi-billion that you haven't heard of until he was unable to continue. So the movies that you probably have heard of, the Nick Cage Wicker Man, The Irishman, directed by my Lord and Savior, Marty Scorsese, Silence, also directed by Marty, and Wonderland, which is actually one of my favorite biopics, which is the story about John Holmes and the murder rap that he beat in 1980. But what I did, because he has made 11 billion movies, is I went to our friends at ChatGPT and I asked them to make me a list of Randall Emmett movies that sounded real but weren't. And then I also pulled several of his movies that are real. And I figured we could play the game Real or Fake Randall Emmett Movie.
Okay.
So is Midnight Mirage a real movie?
Title sounds a bit abstract, so I'm going to say ChatGPT.
Yes. Okay. Next one. Savage Salvation.
Fond of alliteration there. ChatGPT?
No, that is a real movie.
What is it about?
I am so glad you asked. Savage Salvation is a 2022 thriller action movie starring Jack Houston, Robert De Niro, and John Malkovich. It is about a recovering opioid addict who seeks revenge on the dealers responsible for selling the drugs that resulted in his fiance's death. Okay, next one. Out of Death.
That sounds real.
It is real.
What is Out of Death about?
Out of Death is a 2021 movie. And it stars Bruce Willis and Jamie King.
Oh no.
A corrupt sheriff's department in a rural mountain town comes undone when an unintended witness throws a wrench into their shady operation.
I am probably never watching this.
I think it's safe to say you are not going to watch any of these. Steel Horizon.
That sounds like ChatGPT.
You're right. That is ChatGPT. Hot Seat.
That sounds real.
You're amazing at this. This is a 2022 movie starring Mel Gibson, Shannon Doherty, and Kevin Dillon An ex-hacker is forced to break into high-level banking institutions. Another man must try to penetrate the booby-trap building to get the young man off the hot seat.
R.I.P. Shannon Doherty.
Lionsgate released a lot of these movies, so they must have really felt bad about Gotti if they sold the rights back to them. Because it seems like they will release anything. Okay, next one. Echoes of War.
That sounds real.
That is fake. I know.
Which war was it?
Not sure. ChatGPT did not issue me descriptions, but I bet if I went back in there, they could spit out a film synopsis not dissimilar to the ones I have already read you.
Yeah, it sounds like imitations of other films designed to clear a profit because they star people who've been in better movies.
That seems to be the MO. It is very much quantity-driven effort. I'm going to give you two more.
Okay.
Shadowed Vengeance.
That sounds fake.
You are correct.
Yay.
Okay. Catch 44.
I think that sounds real.
Yes.
So we know what a catch-22 is. What is a catch-44?
Okay, a catch 44 is a 2011 movie starring Forrest Whitaker, Bruce Willis, Malin Ackerman, Hickey Reed, Deborah Ann Wool, and Brad Dourif. 3 women are sent to intercept a major drug deal at a diner at 3 a.m. and get the money. Simple, save for Murphy's Law. Anything that can go wrong will go wrong.
That is not a unique catch needing a number. That is Murphy's Law.
Yeah. I'm guessing the 44 is in reference to the gun.
I assumed that there were numbered styles of catches, but this is not a catch deserving a number, except as a play on the name of the gun, but that was not obvious to me because I'm not into guns either.
So we did 8 of these, and you got 6 out of 8 of these correct.
So my takeaway from this quiz, Sarah, is that Randall Emmett is a hack producer who, once all who have known him are gone, will lie in an unvisited grave.
Possibly, yes. On that note, now that you have won big on the Randall Emmett ChatGPT or real movie competition, did you have any choice dialogue?
I sort of liked the line. Neil used to say, "This life of ours is a wonderful line if you can get away with it." But that also sounds like ChatGPT for people being sentimental in a mob movie.
I like that line not because it was necessarily insightful or original, but I also felt like if there was a line of dialogue that kind of set out how badly Gotti screwed up, it would be that. Because John Gotti did nothing to try and get away with the life, and Neil did. Neil laid low, did get away with it, but who cares? Why is this movie here? Why do we have it?
I think you explained it. Randall Emmett saw easy money, low effort, and gambled wrong this time.
This movie started off with people like Al Pacino and Joe Pesci and Barry Levinson attached to it. And this is where it ended up. It kind of disintegrated.
Yikes. So with that, shall we get to scoring this?
Yeah, let's do it.
For outward appearances, hair, and makeup, I gave it a 3. A lot of it was bad, some was okay. There's definitely worse stuff out there. The Richard Spencer haircut was, as you said, totally not in keeping with the era, too.
Yeah, I gave it a 5. Similar reasons, though, is that it felt like some people went all the way in and other people just sort of showed up. I hated the inconsistency of the outward appearances.
For acting and casting, I gave it a 1. Everyone's terrible. Where there were people who were passable, they were so unmemorable, I couldn't think of anyone to point out as a mitigating factor. Don't pretend that putting on an outer borough accent and holding your mouth as if you forgot to put your dentures in is acting.
I gave it a 2. Same reasons. Nobody looks right. No one is acting very well. This is a train wreck of bad performances. that are all over the lot in terms of how they're being conducted. Passage of time.
I gave it a 4. I had no trouble knowing where or when we were. It wasn't notable. It was okay, sort of.
3. Same. I vaguely knew where we were time-wise. I also felt like it was quite difficult to discern, particularly towards the end, because it wouldn't have been sexy to age the younger Gotti and make him look like he had actually been in prison for more than 3 weeks. I couldn't tell how long things had been in a lot of cases. Costuming,
I gave it a 3. It was low effort. I gave it a 3 for similar reasons to all the things we didn't like about the costuming in Gia, because nobody was having any fun with the potential here.
Same, 3. Quality of the script, I gave this a 1.
I also gave this a 1. Again, sounds like ChatGPT of a mob movie. There is not a destroyed Gore Vidal masterpiece hiding in this movie.
It's so uninteresting. The scenes are so short. I know nothing about these people, and I could give a rat's ass about any of them. And accuracy, so I'm going to just take you inside my accuracy rating here. I came out with a 5. I would say in terms of hitting the basics of the narrative, I gave it a 10. I gave it a 1 for the way it was framed and for the omissions. So came out to a 5.
So I gave it a 4 because it seemed like they followed basics. They didn't invent people, but it was inaccurate to say that any of these were good guys. It was ridiculous. And I had issues with that because not only did it do this, it failed to give anyone the charisma or the engaging storytelling that would have been needed to make that kind of view of them feel truthful.
Yeah, it lacked any insight or critical thinking about any of the things that were going on. You didn't even feel like they knew what they were doing was wrong.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like when they're deciding to kill someone, it doesn't even feel like anyone's like, hey, maybe we shouldn't be murdering people.
It failed to say, oh, these are sociopaths and they have their own framing, which is something you see in some of these. For storytelling, I gave it a 1.
I gave it a 2. I don't even know why I gave it that high of a score. It seems generous and naive of me.
For production value, I gave it a 3. It got points for the cars looking nice and that I believed that was the Plaza Hotel. Otherwise, everything just looks dingy and unexciting and low budget. We've seen movies with small budgets that still manage to make things look authentic and rich with specifics that make things feel real. This just felt like walls and chairs for the most part.
I could have done with 100 fewer cars and a 20% dial up of some of the costumes and the commitment of the looks. And I also gave it a 3. Production and direction decision making, I gave it a 2. And the only reason it's that high is because I feel sorry for Kevin Connolly.
I did not feel sorry for him. I gave it a 1.
And that's fair. I will say it again. This movie shouldn't exist. What does exist is barely a movie.
Well, yes, it is data that has been captured and recorded on film with a device for future viewing.
It feels like it was made under cover of night in shame for tax shelter reasons. There is such a joylessness to it. It feels like it's all like very shady and also like no one is supposed to ever see it. And do we care? I give it a 1. I don't care. I'm offended that they're trying so hard to make me care.
Me too. That's why I gave it a 0 for do we care. Sarah, my average came to 2.1. What did yours come to?
My average came to 2.4.
Our total combined average? In that case, our total combined average comes to 2.25, which means that Gotti qualifies for second opinion, the element we blatantly ripped off from How Did This Get Made?
Yay, second opinions.
One of the situations that I ran into in finding these was that MoviePass, one of the companies involved with this film, owned a review site that they used to try to game user reviews, saying, aren't critics elitist? So I get these reviews from IMDb, but I don't know if these were potentially written by ChatGPT trying to game the user reviews.
There's always that possibility, given the level of technology we think is involved in the making of the creative decisions on this film in general.
Yes, Sarah, can you please read this first 10-star review for Gotti?
Yes, happily. Okay, from our friend Lizard Dude 27975. Let me tell you some. Gotti is the greatest movie in the world. Travolta does a stellar job. I legitimately started calling him John whilst watching the movie. Long story short, you won't get to see another movie like this if you live to be 5,000. 10 out of 10.
I see that this was written in May of 2022 after there would have been impetus to write fake good reviews, but I don't know what would have been odd about calling Travolta John, because his name is John and the character he's playing is also named John.
I don't think this review is good enough to have been written by a computer. I do agree that I won't see another movie like this if I live to be 5,000.
Oh, Sarah, don't say that as a definitive. We have there are a lot of hacky directors and a lot of actors who think they've found an easy way to an Oscar nomination out there.
You're right. We're probably going to watch a movie like this next week.
This next review, with the one-word title, Brilliant, was written by Marasco_Kim on June 22nd of 2018. Gotti, 2018, exposes the truth in living in a world that has lost priorities and hidden secrets. John Travolta's performance was outstanding and deserves recognition. The movie begins with John Travolta standing in front of the GW Bridge, a symbolic representation of the fast life the Gotti family lived from growing up poor and descending into the mafia. The story of Gotti is one of love, hardship, loss, betrayal, division, and unity. The family's love and devotion to each other is admirable. This movie is important for all to watch to gain a better understanding of our livelihood.
Is she in the mafia?
Oh my gosh, that was what I thought when she said, our livelihood. This must have been written by a mafiosa who wants to stand up for her people.
I don't understand what that first sentence means, and I'm going to sit on that for a long time. Exposes the truth in living in a world that has lost priorities and hidden secrets.
She makes reference to the George Washington Bridge, but you see the number 7 train moving into Manhattan with the Midtown skyline. The George Washington Bridge is way uptown and goes from New Jersey into Manhattan. Nowhere where you would see the number 7 train line, which does not go to New Jersey.
None of our subways go to New Jersey.
That is not the George Washington Bridge.
He's standing in front of that bridge to remind us of a time when he stood in front of that bridge in a better movie. That's why he's standing in front of that bridge.
It's the Verrazano Narrows Bridge in Saturday Night Fever.
Oh, can I read this next one?
Sure.
Critics are pajama boys who are feminized. From Wise 40311, written on June 15th of 2018. Warning, spoilers. This movie is for alpha males. Enough said. Love the movie. The real gangsters are our corrupt government. The people in Gotti's neighborhood loved him, which they showed in real footage. No order in the streets when he was gone, just like what's happening in Chicago every day. Dumb kids that have no respect. Grow some B and go see this film. use your movie pass card. So I think this checks the box of your movie pass thing here. I'm interested to know where we think the spoiler is in this. Is it the Chicago thing? Talk about checking in the box of conservative America right there. Like, they love to talk about Chicago.
ChatGPT write a review pretending to be someone who, if they're real, is probably still posting Pepe the Frog memes.
So this is before ChatGPT existed. This was written. However, what do you think you have to plug into ChatGPT in order to get them to spit back a review like this? Sounds like it was written by someone who listens to a lot of Alex Jones and failed the police exam.
This sounds like it was written by someone living in a second world country making very little pay, and they're given an idea about the market segment they need to appeal to, but it's not their first language culturally, which is why there's no content in this for warnings for spoilers, because they probably didn't watch Gotti.
I have another question before we move on to the next. It says grow some B. What is B?
I don't think it means breasts, possibly balls. I've never seen B used in that way to mean any of the body parts it could mean.
Grow some B. Cool. Okay, do you want to read the next one?
Sure. Wow. Someone also used the one-word title, brilliant, fresh up, on March 31st of 2019. A cross between The Godfather and The Sopranos. Great story that had me in tears in first 10 minutes. Absolutely loved it.
What part of the first 10 minutes do you think was making this person cry?
Going up to that 10-minute mark is the part where he meets with his son in prison within the first 10 minutes. That could have been sentimental. I can't see anything to cry over in that. The talk on the bridge, I don't know why you would cry over it.
I did find one more. Another great The Godfather type movie ever made. Written by BERICW on June 23rd, 2018. You're about to see a very close-up at John Gotti. Personally, I love this biography movie. It recaps those deep emotion of a man, a father, a husband, a friend, a boss, and a king, etc. It's one of those Godfather types movies like Goodfellas, Carlito's Way, Casino, ... It carries the most important concept to be a real man. I say leave the fear after death, be braved as a man.
No, this guy flunked second grade English.
There's people who confer onto all mafia movies kind of the same level of goodness. It doesn't mention Scarface, but Scarface and Carlito's Way are both Brian De Palma movies. They have a very different energy than Goodfellas or Casino, which also have a very different energy than the Godfather movies. This movie isn't as good as anything.
So things to watch instead: Goodfellas, Godfather, anything you just mentioned instead of Gotti. Google clips from Rollergator where you can at least laugh at how terrible it is, and it takes less time to watch clips of Rollergator than it does to sit through Gotti.
I have 1,000 things I would recommend over this. Those include the documentaries I watched to prepare for this episode. Those include every movie I've talked about in this episode. I would say the book Wise Guys that Goodfellas is based on is outstanding if you want to understand the mafia. If you're just interested in understanding like the ecosystem of crime, David Simon's Homicide is a wonderful book that helps you kind of understand crime in a community and the role that it has if it's more the sociology of the mafia that you're interested in. I could go on for days. Basically, don't seek out this film. It's not even enjoyable in like that, like, holy shit, what am I watching kind of way. It's mirthless. It's not insightful. There's 100 other things out there that will tell you more about who John Gotti was and what he meant and what he did and how kind of horrible everything around him was, like, in a much more wonderful way than this movie does. This movie fails on every conceivable level. Do not seek it out. Your time is too valuable. Go for a walk.
To highlight how terrible this movie is, I will be including some links to clips from Roller Gator in the show notes as an example of another case of data captured on film with a recording device for future viewing. That is something that I have never thought I would say in this podcast.
Watch any of the Randall Emmett movies that Rena so successfully identified. Go volunteer at a homeless shelter. Like, anything, literally do anything besides watch this movie. It's just not worth it. On this note, if you like the show, please leave us a 5-star rating and subscribe to us on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And tell a friend, or better yet, plural friends, and share us on social media. We hear it helps. I also want to add here, too, that we have launched an Instagram page where we will be showing visual aids from our episodes. Our Instagram handle is Biopic, a podcast story. So do check us out there, and we'll link to that in the show notes as well.
Tune in next week when we'll be talking about and starring Pancho Villa as himself, starring Antonio Banderas.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Bye-bye.